War has always been a savage and brutal affair, and while it can show the worst qualities in humanity, it also presents opportunities for men and women to carry out distinguished acts of valor, courage, and sacrifice. Today, on the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War, Argentina celebrates the Day of the Veterans and Fallen of the Malvinas War. It's a day that honors Argentinian veterans who not only fought the British Empire, but also the tortures and extreme conditions that were imposed upon them by their often cowardly and ruthless superiors. I'm your host David, and this week we turn to one of the most recognizable conflicts of the Cold War to analyze the hardships endured by the Argentinian soldiers, as well as the role the Argentine government played in those hardships. This is the Cold War. My thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Squarespace gives people a powerful and beautiful online platform to help create a website for seamless communication with your customers and followers. Use Squarespace to connect with your audience and generate revenue through gated, members-only content. Manage your members, send email communications, and leverage audience insights, all on one easy-to-use platform. Create a community on your Squarespace website that supports threaded comments, replies, and likes, and uses Squarespace's powerful blogging tools to schedule and share posts. And you can even display feedback from your social media profiles right to your website. If you've been thinking about creating a website, either for your personal brand, resume, business, or just for fun, go to squarespace.com/thecoldwar to start your free trial and get 10% off your first purchase. 40 years have passed since the Argentine junta, the military dictatorship led by Leopoldo Galtieri, Jorge Anaya, and Basilio Lamidoso, launched Operation Rosario, the invasion of the Falkland Islands, if you're British, or Las Islas Malvinas, if you're Argentinian. This was a gamble by the junta, commonly known as El Proceso, which aimed to swiftly secure their claims on the South Atlantic Islands and ultimately to improve their domestic popularity. The government of Lieutenant General Leopoldo Galtieri didn't expect the United Kingdom to fight a war for the islands and were also relying on American neutrality given the good relations that the two anti-communist countries enjoyed. Now, for some context, at this time Argentina was threatened on its western border by the military dictatorship which ruled Chile, and a possible war between the two South American nations over their long-running dispute over control of the Beagle Channel was a strong possibility. In fact, the Argentinians believed that if the Falklands War was successful, then they would also be in a position to take by force the disputed territory with Chile. In order to maintain a strong border defense against the Chileans in the meantime, the bulk of Argentine forces being deployed for the invasion of the Falklands ended up being young and inexperienced conscripts. The plan formulated by Admiral Jorge Anaya calculated that the UK, the colonial masters of the sheep-infested islands, would never respond militarily to the loss of an outpost so far away from the British homeland. The decision to utilize inexperienced forces was based on the invasion being a political maneuver, one that would face very little military opposition. And yet, as most of us know, Galtieri's political gamble quickly turned into a giant miscalculation. The government of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher rapidly decided to assemble a strong naval task force to carry out the reconquest of the distant Falkland Islands. For the war, Argentina mobilized 23,428 combatants to fight against the British. More than 12,500 of those mobilized were teenagers, aged between 18 and 20 years old, and had been forcibly conscripted to participate in a war that many feel should never have happened. Some had less than 4 months of training, short enough that they hadn't even been issued dog tags. Some were sent with insufficient or obsolete equipment, while others were subjected to torture used as a method by their superiors to secure their obedience. Now, as any military planner should tell you, an army is only as good as its supply lines. The logistical operation in place to maintain the Argentinian presence on the islands was also completely inadequate. Much of it was largely improvised, as the Argentine leaders didn't believe the UK would respond militarily, so sustaining a combat force was not deemed an eventuality to plan for. Units lacked vehicles and sufficient ammunition, There was no internal transportation system to move the supplies they did have, and there were many deficiencies in the preparation and distribution of food. Most of the young conscripts didn't know how to withstand the harsh temperatures and environment of the South Atlantic winter either. Despite this, they were sent without warm clothing or proper footwear to survive in the cold and windy weather of the islands. As you would expect, all of this had a negative impact on the physical state and morale of the Argentinian soldiers, with some estimates suggesting that their combat readiness was reduced by 40 to 50% before any shots had even been fired. Hunger was rampant across the islands, so much so that many young soldiers would venture out of their positions to search for food in the garbage, to buy food from the villages, or to steal from their own stores. Sometimes they would even catch and butcher sheep and then eat the meat raw. According to Carlos Quiros, a soldier who served in the occupation force, "Sometimes we killed a sheep. We had to eat the meat raw with the blood all over our faces. Hunger makes you do things you never thought you could ever do. Hunger is something terrible." If these conscripts were caught, however, they could be subject to significant tortures as punishment. Another conscript, Silvio Katz, described one punishment referred to as getting staked out. The soldiers' arms and legs were tied to stakes, stretching their limbs and holding them about 10 centimeters above the ground, and the young men, stripped of most of their clothes, would be then left there for hours in temperatures as low as minus 20 degrees centigrade. Surviving veterans like Katz and Oscar Nunez have denounced these acts of barbarism in recent years, with Katz even claiming that a friend of his, due to his particularly rebellious nature, was not only staked out, but had a grenade placed in his mouth, and that if he spit it out, then they would all likely be killed as a result. Other punishments and tortures inflicted on the young conscripts could be quite varied, but they were all intended to be demeaning and humiliating. Some soldiers were forced to dig a pit and bury themselves in it with the frozen peat up to their necks. Others were forced to stand barefoot in puddles next to the field telephones. When the phone was in use, small electric shocks would be given to the soldier. Others were forced to submerge their hands, feet, or even heads in freezing water for a considerable period of time. To quote Silvio Katz again, "They forced us to use the butt of our rifles to break the frozen crust that formed in the little lakes during the night because of the high humidity, to then put our heads, hands, or feet into the frozen water for a considerable time. That's why so many of us came back with trench foot or osteoarthritis in our hands. They also forced us to put our heads inside, an unimaginable sensation of pain." Katz also recounted how some soldiers were forced at gunpoint to eat their food in the latrines. "Then this second lieutenant took me to the latrines, where the whole squad's bowel movements were, and at gunpoint he threw some food and forced me to eat it among the human waste." But the young conscripts were not only subjected to physical tortures, but also verbal and psychological abuses. Some were insulted or attacked by racist or religious epithets. Katz, for example, recalls that he awoke every day to hear his commanding officer calling him a, quote, dirty Jew. When he and his comrades were about to enter combat, his superiors also told him that they were, quote, going to lose because of him because all Jews were traitors, end quote. And Katz's case wasn't isolated. These displays of anti-Semitism were quite common, and many young Argentinian Jews were subjected to abuse. We should point out, of course, that not all military officers were like this, but a significant number of them had been corrupted by the power the military enjoyed in Argentina. Witnessing one operational and logistical failure after another, some of their own making, these officers deemed it appropriate to torture their own men if discipline or morale broke, employing methods that they had learned and practiced during the dirty war against the Argentine left in the 1970s. According to Carlos Enriori, the president of the veteran center Avañaro, when the enemy began to show its teeth coming at us with all their strength, many of our superiors went into hiding, others turned against one another, and others ran away, leaving the conscripts at the battlefront. Enriori adds that for the last 39 years, he's heard many tales of suffering, all of them completely painful to hear. A major reason that caused Enriori to step forward to tell his truth about the war and how painful it was for many of the veterans. Today, there are 95 military officers who have been denounced, with 105 cases of torture, and there are more than 120 testimonies on record detailing these acts. 4 decades later, the surviving veterans of Malvinas are still asking for justice. Now, we've been talking about the experiences of the Army, but not all veterans fought on land. Many served in the Argentine Navy, an organization which sustained more than half of the total Argentinian casualties of the war. By the end of the Falklands War, Argentina had suffered 649 combatants killed. 194 of them came from the Army, while 391 were members of the Navy. Of those 391, 323 died from a single action, the infamous sinking of the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano. Felipe Martiarena, who survived the death of the cruiser, recalls that everything was dark, there were no orders, it was all darkness and screams. In the chaos, Martiarena managed to get to the deck and rapidly set out to help those sailors who were injured. He recalled seeing a person completely red burned by the petroleum, who they could only cover with blankets. 20 minutes after the impact of the first torpedo fired from the submarine HMS Conqueror, Captain Hector Bonzo ordered the ship abandoned. Himself a survivor, he recalled, "With the inclination of a degree per minute, a total silence fell upon us, and all kinds of forces stopped except those that were human. There were several fires, jets of steam and hot petroleum, floods, and an expansive wave that tore through the decks, leaving the destruction of both men and machines. It was in these moments that some of the most wonderful heroic acts unfolded, in which aid was delivered regardless of age, position, and rank, and to the extent of giving their own lives for it." Sailors who were able to abandon ship then had to exit the cruiser on rafts, many of them with punctured valves. Martiarena recalled that they had to row with their hands and that they had to inflate the raft every hour. A huge rescue operation was then mounted in very difficult weather, employing 5 vessels and a variety of air elements, which would successfully manage to rescue 770 survivors, as well as the bodies of many of the deceased. Back on land, some of the Argentinian soldiers that died in the fighting against the British would suffer further insult in death. Because of the negligence and ineptitude of the Argentinian officers, most of the fallen during the war were buried in temporary graves close to where they fell, without their names recorded or any tags to allow for later recognition. Many of them would be buried in mass graves, while others were simply left to rot on the battlefield. With the ending of the war, the British forces on the island needed to decide what to do with the fallen. At first, the UK offered to send the bodies back to Buenos Aires so that they could be laid to rest on Argentinian soil, but both the military junta as well as the families of the deceased refused this offer, arguing that they were already on home soil. As a result, in December of 1982, the British government commissioned a group of civilian undertakers under the command of Colonel Jeffrey Cardozo to move the Argentinian bodies into a single location, the Darwin Cemetery. There, assisted by the armed forces, British undertakers would individually bury the Argentine fallen with full military honors and Christian rituals, marking their graves with a white wooden cross. If known, their names were marked below the cross. Otherwise, those who had no dog tags or any other way of recognizing their identity were marked with the legend, Soldado Argentino solo conocido por Dios, an Argentine soldier known only by God. For years after the fighting, the identity of these soldiers remained unknown. However, recently, thanks to the actions of Colonel Cardozo, many of the unrecognized Argentinian soldiers have been identified through the joint efforts of the Argentine and British governments, with assistance from the Red Cross. Cardozo made a decision to conduct a meticulous search of each Argentine body, including taking note of valuable information such as where the body had been found or the personal belongings that it carried. The reports he wrote during the burial procedures were also of tremendous assistance for the Red Cross, which had been able to identify more than 115 Argentine soldiers of the 230 that rest in the Darwin Cemetery. This now provides the ability for families to visit and mourn their loved ones, providing opportunity for closure for families that suffered not knowing where their sons were buried. Today, on its 40th anniversary, the Falklands War is still very present in the collective memory of the Argentinian people. The veterans of Malvinas are recognized each year, and it was their sacrifice that ultimately led to the downfall of the military junta that ruled Argentina between 1976 and 1983. It was their sacrifice that brought Argentina back to democracy. War is brutal and savage, and those who have to walk that path are often scarred for life, carrying their experiences and traumas, sometimes with help and sometimes without. And it isn't only the veterans that suffer, but also whole families: mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, daughters, and sons. Their secondary experiences from the impacts of war also deserve recognition. It is therefore important to honor the heroism and sacrifice of those men and women affected by war, and to remember them not as victims, but as proud war veterans. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and to make sure you don't miss all of our future episodes, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have recognized the bell button for the suffering and trauma which it has been subjected to as a result of the things we do to it every week. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our supporters, and if you aren't a patron, please consider supporting us at www.patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is the Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, I will leave you with the words of JFK. In the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal.